Hello, my spooky crew, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if this is your first time here. My name is Alex, and thanks for coming to my spooky corner of the internet. Over the past year and a half, 2 years that I've had this YouTube channel, I've always been talking about like haunted stories. I've added a little bit of skepticism to the channel as well. But one thing that I haven't really addressed is what is commonly perceived as paranormal when it's really not. And this is a tricky subject too, because anytime I've talked about this particular topic, people have accused me of just like debunking all paranormal activity, but that's really not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give people more options to think about whenever they go to a haunted location or they get a report of a haunting and they're about to investigate it. It's just things that we should probably just keep in mind when it comes to investigating the paranormal. So I have a list of things to think about whenever, you encounter a certain phenomena and just some alternatives that it could be. And ironically, I put together 13-ish things to think about. Maybe 12. We'll see what happens here. So I call myself a skeptical believer. So I tend to teeter on that line between being a total believer in the paranormal, but also acting like a skeptic. Now, one term that I run into as a skeptical believer often is Occams Razor. And without dedicating an entire video trying to explain what Occams Razor is, the short version of the definition is the simplest explanation is the most valid. So for example, like the Roswell incident, I think in 1947, the most simplest explanation would be it was a weather balloon. But that's just an example. When we run into reports of alleged paranormal activity, Occam's Razor may come up often on the skeptic side, but also it could also be like the simplest explanation could be a ghost. So Occam's Razor is a bit of a tricky term, but as I walk this line between being a skeptic and being a believer, I run into this principle often. And I constantly have to check myself to make sure that my bias isn't coming into play. Just wanted to put that little footnote in there. But before we get started, be sure to click on that subscribe button, give this video a like, and be sure to click on that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when I upload a new video. I tend to post on Wednesday evenings now around 8 o'clock Eastern time, so if you're around, hop on one of the live premieres. I'll usually be in the chat room hanging out like I am right now if you're watching this right now. Goodness, that's so meta. And if you enjoyed this video and you want more spooky content, you can hit me up at TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at The Spooky Stuff. And you can also go to my website where I have a blog at thespookystuff.com. And also if you want your own spooky merch, I do have a shop on Etsy. It's thespookystuff.etsy.com. I have mugs, I have t-shirts, I have buttons and books. Spooky stuff to satisfy your spooky side. I'll even show you the t-shirt I designed. Spooky cat lady. But before I stop promoting myself, if you would like to see a blooper reel of this video or any of my other previous videos, then you should go to my Patreon for just $3 per month. You can see a blooper reel, you can see behind the scenes at my events, and you can also get a sneak peek at some haunted locations I'm going to, and here's some personal thoughts of mine that I don't really put on YouTube or anything on a public forum. Tiers start at $3 a month. If you do the tier that's $9 per month or higher, then you will get a free book every year. And by the way, I also post excerpts of my works in progress, and I am working on a book right now, hoping to release, right before the summertime. So if you go to patreon.com/the spooky stuff, you can become a patron on my Patreon. All right, now I'm done promoting myself. Let's get started. So what are some things that's most often mistaken as paranormal? Well, I'm going to address the most obvious one in the room, and that is orbs. Whether you see orbs in photos or videos. Now, I am talking specifically about orbs that you see in media, like photos and videos. And if there's anyone here that is a hardcore orb believer, I am so sorry to say this, but it's dust, it's moisture, it's dander, it's bugs. There's so many other things it could be. And in fact, orbs are addressed in the troubleshooting section of most cameras. And for those of you who don't know, I started out as a photographer. In 2007, 2008, I was a photographer, and I already knew what orbs were because I saw them in my camera. So essentially, without getting too deep into the woods, there's so many really good videos out there explaining what orbs are. But when a piece of dust or dander or moisture gets close to the camera, it will start to get a little bit blurry, or it may sharpen up. And usually they're going to be round, but sometimes they're a little wonky looking. Like right now, see my finger? It's sharpening up and then it blurs out. And some orbs are transparent, especially the ones that are, made of moisture. And also, I know people will try to make the case of, well, it's going against the flow of air. Here's the deal. If you've ever, had the sunshine through the window of like your home and you smack your couch a few times so that some dust flies up, you'll see all those little dust particles. They're all going everywhere. They're not following an air current. So whenever I do have someone come to me with orbs or any sort of like weird anomalies, that takes up, space, I usually have to chalk it up to it's dust, moisture, bugs. Bugs are a big one. Now, bugs can be like different shapes, so that they can be very much mistaken as something paranormal. I highly recommend that anybody who's interested in the paranormal and analyzing paranormal evidence definitely take some classes in photography and videography, and you will catch all of that stuff. I mean, it may ruin that, suspension of disbelief of like, oh, maybe I did catch a spirit, but yeah. But here's the deal though. Are there such thing as paranormal orbs? I mean, yeah, okay. I don't know if I would call them orbs, but I have seen balls of light that emit their own light. They have like certain colors, and I've seen them fly around with intention. The orbs that I see in photos and videos are very random, and because it all comes down to light and how cameras, their job is to find shapes and to find sources of light. So you'll see different colors in these orbs because, you ever heard of the light spectrum where you have like the different color scale? That's exactly like what's going on there. I would say legit paranormal orbs usually emit their own light, not necessarily reflect light that you would see in photos and videos. But like I said, even like the real life paranormal orbs, I wouldn't call them orbs. I would just call them anomalies. But yeah, the orbs that we see in photos and videos, 99.99999% of them are explainable. But they are also the most often commonly mistaken as paranormal. And there's so many different environments that you can capture orbs. You can capture them in a house, you can capture them outside. And again, it all comes down to what's in the air. And 9 times out of 10, these orbs are something explainable that just got caught up in the air, especially dirt and dander and moisture, like rain. Oh man, especially in humid conditions, you can get some really good orbs outside in a cemetery in the middle of summer in the South. Because guess what? There's a lot of moisture in the air. All right, enough about orbs. This entire video, I'm not going to dedicate it to orbs. All right, the second one's going to be footsteps. Now, unless you can 100% verify that you're the only one in the building, a lot of times footsteps are explainable. Now, when I do hear footsteps when I'm watching footage from other creators, I have to admit I am extremely doubtful that it is paranormal because footsteps are an easy thing to fake. So unless I'm there and I can 100% verify that there's nobody else in the building but me, footsteps are a really hard one for me. And especially with like bigger locations that do group ghost hunts where you have like 20, 30, 40 people at a location and people are hearing footsteps above them, it's like you got to throw that out because it literally could be anybody. And also the other thing that could cause footsteps is, I know this isn't a great thing to mention because it makes people feel a little gross, but it could be animals. A lot of haunted locations, especially the ones that aren't well taken care of, sometimes they have animals in the walls, raccoons, squirrels. I had a case one time where the client kept hearing scratching and scurrying in their walls, thinking it was a ghost, but then we found animal droppings, and it turns out that there were squirrels in this client's house that she didn't even know about. But anytime she heard footsteps or scurrying, she thought ghost and demon, not a squirrel. And thankfully, we got it taken care of. All right, another one, flickering lights. Now, before we jump to anything paranormal with flickering lights, you really need to call an electrician. Now, a lot of them will do free consultations. Sometimes they don't. Definitely, you want to call a professional in to check what the source is of the flickering lights. And if that expert cannot find the source, then you might have something. But again, 9 times out of 10, flickering lights can be accounted for like loose wiring, a battery not quite in all the way. I mean, the flashlight trick, oh, that's one that's commonly misinterpreted as paranormal. The whole thing about the flashlight trick is you unscrew the flashlight just enough where the battery is touching, the sensor so that it can go on and off randomly. But really, depending on weather conditions and environmental conditions, like what's going on with the floor, that can set off the flashlight trick. So I guess, yeah, we're at 13 misconceptions about paranormal stuff. All right, here's another one. Temperature fluctuations. Now, I know that people will interpret temperature fluctuations as paranormal, and maybe sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. What I highly recommend is get some sort of device that can track temperature fluctuations over a period of time so that you can see whether or not there's a pattern with like the rise in temperature and the drop in temperature. And when it comes to people experiencing temperature fluctuations as well, I'm actually going to get more into it in the next subject. So actually, this is a good segue for sounds. Sounds are often misinterpreted as paranormal, but they can be explainable. Depending on the sensitivity of your microphone. Like say you don't hear anything with your human living ear, but then you review your audio data and you hear like a child's voice, or you hear squeaking, or you hear something else. Sometimes there are sounds that we don't pick up with our ears, but our microphones are so sensitive that it can pick up something going on from down the street. So we have outside noise, there could be people inside talking, especially people whispering. Here's a big thing. If you are on a paranormal investigation, do not whisper. Please do not whisper, because if you're whispering and you don't tag it and then you're talking like this, or you say, hey, whoever's listening to that audio may end up thinking, oh snap, we caught a ghost. So this leads me into a subject that's known as vibroacoustics, meaning that sounds and whatnot can cause a certain vibration. And there's some subcategories with vibroacoustics. One of them is infrasound. Now, infrasound, I alluded to it just a minute ago. This is sound that's too low for human ears to pick up. Now, here's the thing about infrasound, and this goes back to the temperature fluctuations section. Infrasound can cause depression. It can cause people feeling like they're having paranormal experiences. Infrasound can even vibrate internal organs, which can cause people to experience nausea, dizziness, and also feeling cold. It's wild, right? Like infrasound, these sounds that we can't hear ourselves, can cause like all the sensations that people report sometimes at a haunted location, like the nausea, the dizziness, and the feeling cold. And to me, that is absolutely wild. Now, there's another subtopic of vibroacoustics known as the Helmholtz Resonance. And I don't know if you've ever blown into a bottle before. That sound? There's a sound that's being produced there by me just blowing into the tip of this vase or this bottle. And it would be even more prominent if I was using like a wine bottle or a beer bottle. But this same effect of me blowing into the bottle, that can happen like in a room with an open window or an open door. That same effect can happen. And when paranormal investigators hear that sound, they may think that, hey, it could be paranormal, but really it's not. There was a location that I investigated that had a lot of open doors on the premises, and that, I'll be honest, made me feel a little nervous because intruders, but I realized that a lot of the sounds, the spooky sounds I was hearing and the and the rumblings I was hearing, it was all because of these open doors and windows. And there was a story that I heard, and I can't cite specifics, but there were some contractors who were building an apartment complex. They were building an apartment building, and apparently the manager had ripped them off on their full pay, so they left all of these empty bottles on the roof. So whenever the wind was blowing, literally this Helmholtz resonance was causing all of these bottles to make noises, and it was freaking people out because they were hearing all these strange sounds. But it's really very similar to like hearing the wind. And another subtopic of infrasound, vibroacoustics, is the canyon effect. Believe it or not, So the canyon effect, if there's somebody like say at the bottom of the canyon that's talking, depending on how the wind is blowing, they can pick up the sound waves from that conversation, and people who are in higher levels or at higher levels can hear like bits and pieces of the conversation and words. This same effect can actually happen in cities, with skyscrapers, because, the wind, the way that it moves between the skyscrapers will have a very similar effect. So essentially what all of this is saying is sound can carry with the canyon effect. So if you're living, let's say, in a high-rise apartment building, and there are conversations happening a couple floors below you, and you start hearing words and conversations, before you think that it's a ghost, it could be your neighbors having a conversation with the window open. And yeah, that is fascinating to me. Another topic that I do want to cover is kids talking to ghosts. As somebody who did work in elementary education and in preschool for a couple years and in another life, I will say that yes, kids have very vivid imaginations. And sometimes there are children who may or may not be talking to ghosts. But I've noticed with parents who question their kids about like who their imaginary friend is or who they're talking to, they may inadvertently like plant information in there for the child to validate. So for example, you see a child staring into the corner, and you may hear the parent say, "Oh, do you see a scary man over there?" The kid may or may not be inclined to say yes. Instead, you should ask, "Do you see something over there?" Or "What do you see?" And let the child answer organically. I mean, children are very impressionable, especially if they've watched something on TV and they're trying to replicate it, or if they watch something that scares them and it kind of freaks them out for a little bit. Before we completely jump to a child talking to a ghost, especially if they're not offering a lot of details, but it's the parents unintentionally usually planting details, that's something to keep in mind. Now, I have read some really interesting accounts of children allegedly seeing spirits, and then that's validated, or kids have a past life that they talk about and then that's validated. That's a little bit of a different story. But I've noticed, especially on platforms like TikTok, where if a child sees something weird, it goes viral, and then we find out that the mom was telling the kid to say certain things. So we definitely have to be careful about that. All right, EMF spikes. Let's talk about EMF spikes. If you experience too much EMF, electromagnetic field, that can cause like hallucinations and cause you to start thinking that you're having paranormal experiences. I have worked with clients who were surrounded by electronics like computers, phones, even EMF pumps, and they start to experience what they think is paranormal activity, but really what it is EMF poisoning. So definitely before we look at EMF spikes, I mean, everything around me is producing electromagnetic fields right now. I got my monitor here, I have my laptop over here, my microphone, my camera, my phone is somewhere around here, it's over there. That's all producing EMF. The lights behind me, the lights in front of me, it's all producing EMF. So my K2 meter would go nuts right now. So we just want to make sure that when we do experience EMF spikes that, there's not an electronic nearby. Walkie-talkies can set off K2 meters, and walkie-talkies can set off REM pods. So that's definitely something to keep in mind and consider. Here's another one. I don't hear this very often, but I'll get asked, is movement and sounds in the woods. Now, as somebody who does have family members in Appalachia, this is something I hear quite often. Like if you hear your mom's voice in the woods, or you hear your name in the woods, don't go into the woods. That's one thing. But then there are videos that I'll hear or see on social media or YouTube that sounds like a woman screaming, and they assume it's a ghost. And I'll be honest, our ancestors would hear these same sounds and think ghosts, not knowing that it could be a bobcat, or, coyotes. I mean, if you ever hear like bobcats and coyotes, like during mating season, like they make some pretty crazy sounds. So definitely think about whenever you hear like movements and sounds in the woods, especially if you're into looking for Sasquatch or Bigfoot, keep in mind there's a lot of different animals in the woods. There's a lot of different things happening, especially again with the wind blowing, and we have the canyon effect, or we have infrasound that could be creating these really weird experiences in the woods. So just something to keep in mind. Toxins is another one. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause someone to believe that they're having paranormal experiences. So definitely this goes back to analyzing the environmental situation. before we really jump to paranormal. Another one is shadows. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with paranormal investigators who have seen shadows or experienced shadows, not realizing that there was a light source behind them and they were spooked by their own shadow. I've also heard cases of people experiencing shadows that can't be explained, but I would say definitely if you see a shadow or you experience a shadow, look for a light source and just make sure that it's not your shadow or someone else's shadow that you're freaking out about. All right, sleep paralysis. I promise I'm almost done, everybody. Sleep paralysis. Now, this is one that I've talked about a few times. Sleep paralysis usually 9 times out of 10 is not paranormal. What happens with sleep paralysis, it's got to do with the REM cycle in your sleep. And sometimes what happens is the brain wakes up before the body, which is the reason why those who experience sleep paralysis, which is terrifying, do not get me wrong, are not able to move their bodies. So as you go to sleep, your brain releases a chemical that essentially like paralyzes you. This is why, like, if you ever dream about falling or tripping and you have that temporary like movement, that's what that chemical is supposed to help stop. So if you dream about falling out of bed, you're not literally falling out of bed. And sometimes what happens is, as someone's waking up, or depending on what REM cycle they're in, their brain will wake up before the body. They can't move. And sometimes, this is what's really weird, is sometimes the brain is like still dreaming when like the eyes are open, so that people are seeing really weird things during their sleep paralysis incident. Now, don't get me wrong, sleep paralysis is absolutely terrifying, and I've experienced it myself. When I got a CPAP machine, my sleep paralysis incidents essentially went away, but it was scary. It was absolutely scary. So I definitely don't want to invalidate anyone's fear there, but hopefully maybe offer a little bit of comfort that if you do experience something terrifying during your sleep paralysis incident, it probably isn't paranormal. So I would say that if you are having a lot of incidences of sleep paralysis, definitely look into getting a sleep study if you can get it, because then you can see, do you stop breathing in your sleep? Is there anything that's causing you to wake up in the middle of the night? And finally, I want to talk about Peridolia. Peridolia is not only visual. Despite what some people may say, Peridolia actually covers a plethora of different topics. I have covered this subject before in a previous video that you can definitely check out. So Peridolia, we tend to associate it with visual. So let's say you're looking at a pixelated photo and you start to see faces, and people will think, oh no, I'm seeing a ghost. There's a face right there staring at me. But really what your brain is trying to do is make a pattern. Or if you look up at the clouds and you start seeing a bird, or you start seeing a fish, again, it's your brain trying to make sense of what it's looking at and creating patterns. Peridolia, visual peridolia, that's essentially how that works. Now, sensory peridolia, meaning like you feel like you're being touched, or you start feeling sensations on your skin, that is a form of peridolia as well. It's your body trying to make sense of maybe the environment and what it's feeling, especially if you're tense and you're fearful. Your skin, the nerves in your skin and everything are going to react to that. Same thing with audio. There is also audio peridolia. This happens a lot when people review EVPs, when they're reviewing their audio evidence. For me, like a lot of times when I'm watching paranormal television shows and they hear like, and they hear, oh, I heard my name is Sally. I'm sitting here like, how are you hearing that? But that can come down to audio peridolia, and that's why the whole class system of EVPs is really important. Class A is I heard the word Bob, everyone else heard the word Bob, and there's no doubt about it. But when you get to class B, C, and so on, then it starts to get a little bit dicey, and you get a lot of audio peridolia. I experience this a lot in my team when we do group data review. Like if they hear, let's go back to the Bob example. Oh, I heard my name is Bob, but then my other team member hears, my name is Tom. And then another team member hears, this is a psalm. So that's audio peridolia with your ear trying to make sense of what it's hearing, and it starts picking up on familiar words that you may have heard often. And like I said, I don't want this list to be like a debunking of all alleged paranormal activity. These are just things that I want people to consider when before they start making claims that some place is haunted or they're having a paranormal experience. These are definitely some options to look into, and hopefully it can help. I would love to hear what you think about this video. Have you experienced any of these situations or misconceptions? And I know I have. I think I've hit almost every one of these elements on this list where I've interpreted one of these things as paranormal when it wasn't. So let me know if you can relate or if you have anything to add. I would love to hear what you have to say. And of course, don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel if you want to keep consuming my content. And yeah, I hope this was an informative video for you. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next round.